Hi, and welcome to part 4 of the Blood Angels Terminator Captain found in the new 40k Leviathan box set and other smaller starter sets from Games Workshop, as they were kindly enough to send me an early copy for me to make this tutorial series happen. This video will cover the final element that brings the entire model together, which is the base. A treat given to me that this base is supplied with a nicely detailed slate of rock and a Tyranid carcass, which this captain looks like he is slain, or at least he had a good part in it. Through the painting method shown here are a few things to keep in mind during the process to give you a bit of a primer. And that's first off is our color choices. To really help punch out the Blood Angel Terminator Red dominant color, I've decided to use a strong complementary color of green to give a colorful contrast to the piece. Where some might see this as a non-realistic and question if the rocks and dirt are in fact green, this creative choice is more on a vibe and a feeling that these complementary colors give. I put this more in the category of atmosphere, as the model is looking more about stepping into the light and being the main focus. The colors really help the subject stand out further as a result. Or, hell, it's an alien sci fi world, and for all things considered, it could very well be an actually green, if you can read my air quotes. Second is the heavy use of dry brush stippling followed by applications of glazing. This is a great technique to help create texture into areas and illustrate various materials which we don't want to appear smooth. By making stronger marks and applying a glaze from a wash, airbrush glaze, and even through contrast washes, all of these techniques share in a common form of transparent layers to paint that act kind of like a screen to layers of that are underneath. When we view something through a screen, it acts like a similar idea to looking through several sheets of clear plastic. So looking through one sheet of clear plastic, the image result is pretty crisp, but just with a little bit of distortion. But if we were to view it through multiple sheets stacked on top of itself, the image starts to look blurry and faded. Details begin to fade and become softer. This is the concept of which we will do to create rocks and ground textures and to smooth out any harsh lines or later showing when we highlight too much, and we knock it down with glazes. Also, depending on the colors we use, we can tint the area to move the color to a certain direction towards a warmer or a cooler temperature, as well as adjust the brightness of an area. Finally, as less about techniques and more about my process, there are some steps that could have been much shorter or even skipped entirely. This is due to me painting and figuring out visually what's going on. You're seeing me discover how to paint a base, and armed with only two ideas mentioned above, I'm balancing these concepts and referring to the painted model on my desk to see how the base is looking. A few times taking the captain and placing him on the base to see how it looks against the current state. I'd much rather leave all these steps in for you to view as in order to get the full understanding of what goes on when I paint. This isn't a set recipe from start to finish and comes through by making creative predictions and carrying them out. Making changes and adjustments till it all comes together at the end. I had to keep in mind a time frame for this, and I have many commissions to tend to, and I always have a tendency to dive into more details. I just love detail painting, and it's hard to keep my hands from my 00. Well, that's our little primer for this tutorial. Let's get our brushes, paints, and the base ready, and let's get started. Alright, starting off with, we're going to be laying down some textured paste. This comes from Scale75, and it comes in a really nice box from the Environment series. So this one's from the Fantasy series, and it's just a nice textured paste that comes in the set. It's pretty nice and easy to work with. It was really kind of them to send me the set. So there's another future video with use of more of their product in there that's actually going to be used on some White Scars jet bikes. But the nice thing about these acrylic pastes is I don't have to, you don't have to deal with sand and glue. I think these are a lot easier and a lot more forgiving to work with, as well as the slower dry time is really nice. So you don't have to rush to put this on anywhere. And since it's acrylic paste with paint, you could even just mix this with your own colors if you want to mix up your own unique shades of brown. But in this case, we'll be painting over the entire thing, so I'm actually using it more for the texture rather than the color. But, with your own works and with army, especially with putting together basing armies, I find this method a lot quicker. And you can even combine it with, you know, laying down this brown with like a wash, or make a pigment wash, and you know, you can get a little bit of the you can punch out a little more of the fine details. So when this paste dries, you know, it won't be so like chunky like this. You know, the content, the moisture content will evaporate and just leave the brown color with the fine. I don't even know exactly what they use to make it a little bit textured, but it's in there and it dries out quite nice. The only thing is, when applying this, when I'm doing this with this Games Workshop bases, I don't want it to go straight from the soil straight to rock. You know, I like to kind of unify the base a little bit, and, you know, just applying like little bits here and there up the base, maybe just a little bit on the Tyranid carcass. You know, I kind of just try to like blend it in a little bit more so it doesn't look so separated. It looks kind of like a part of the base. All right, so moving into painting the base, I accidentally I did a layer before even filming, but what I'm doing here is in an airbrush with an approximately, I keep my airbrush paints quite thin also because I wanted the paint to be a bit patchy. You know, I'm not looking for like a completely solid cover. What I did here is I mixed it around 50-50 parts X, with Tamiya's X20A thinner, and then with Scalecolor Black Forest Green. Now onto the dry brush part. I'm just using an Artis Opus dry brush, and what I'm going to be doing here is I'm dabbing this onto the rocks. I'm using German Gray, which is from Vallejo, so Vallejo model color, classic color. And what I'm doing here is I'm stippling it on. So the paint that's on is, unfortunately, I had a really big screw up with the palette cam, but painting the bases are really rudiment, like very straightforward. But what I still do is I still thin the paint about you know, 30% water into the mixture, so it's not just, you know, straight out from the bottle. And I'm not doing like a dry brush motion. You know, I'm not like flicking the paint back. I'm not flicking the brush across the model. I'm just dabbing it. I'm using the dry brush from Artis Opus almost like a giant stippling machine. So, you know, stippling is just putting little dots with your brush onto the model to get a stippling pattern. Well, the nice thing is with the dry brush, it's really big and has a lot of ends that are fine. So all I'm doing here is I'm just using it as a stippling motion and putting it onto the texture of the brush. What I've added into the highlight into the German Gray, I just started adding a little bit of Grimy Gray from AK's 3rd generation acrylic line, and it got a little bit of the Black Forest Green in there on my palette, which is kind of like a happy accident. So actually, the nice thing is the highlights are slightly tinted with a little bit of green. So good happy accident on that way. And just like I said in the intro, this base is just about me like discovering what's going to be working and working live on the project rather than knowing the exact recipe from the very start. So you're kind of seeing it, you know, a little bit of experimentation, and a lot of fun. And the nice thing is, like with painting bases, just keeping pretty loose as well, because you know, just keeping the paints like fairly thin, and you know, just trying things out. And the nice thing is, just with bases, it's nothing super critical, but adding more layers just, I think, makes the ground and stuff a little more unique, and it has a little more color involved and little bits of nuances. So you can see I'm just going, just dabbling and just going, adding more Grimy Gray as we go up, and possibly even like just like a pinch of white just to get a little bit more highlights. And even every time I'm just going a little bit lighter with the stippling with the brush, as you can see there. You notice just in general, especially with this base that has like a plateau, you know, a little more highlight goes to the upper edges. Again, like I'm not trying to, run the brush across in a normal dry brush manner. I want to get more of these like stippling marks that are going onto there that make it look pretty rough. Okay, so now for the Dead Nid, we're going to be using the exact same stippling pattern, but this time we're using Sunset Purple from Scale75, the Scalecolour series. Again, I'm watering this down about 30%, 30 to 40% water to 60-70% paint. Just let it be a little bit wet, because I do want a little bit of a softer but like a staining mark to it. And again, I'm really looking for like uneven coverage, and I'm gonna go pretty heavy on this first layer of stippling, so the majority of it's gonna be that sunset purple, and just allowing a little bit of like the black, and the green showing through underneath. But you can already see right away, once you start putting this sunset purple down, that base layer of that black forest green, that's pretty diluted with the airbrush. It loses a lot of that green, and just has like a an off black shadows to it. And then after that sunset purple, now I just started adding a little bit of Grimy gray, again from AK's 3rd generation line, just to build up a little bit of highlight. And the main thing, of course, here is where I focus the highlights. I'm not going to go over the entire carcass evenly. There's going to be 2 points of interest that I want to bring the most attention to, and these are where the highlights will gather towards. The first one is at the front of the face, so the creature's head. And then moving to the back on that kind of like the spinal section, I will base it at the top of the spine, so more to the right. So those 2 areas get the most amount of attention when we start building up our highlights. So again, to get a few different highlighting layers, is just sunset purple, and just keep mixing a little bit more Grimy gray into it, just to get it lighter. And of course, a little bit at the top, of course, more favored towards the front end, towards the face. To continue that kind of like what I was saying in the previous Terminator tutorials about like the little bit of that spotlight look, and where we want to gather the light and the attention. And here's that 3rd layer, again with more Grimy gray added to the sunset purple. And really, like at this stage of the base of the painting, I'm just more looking just at the overall volumes. We haven't really got into any of the details, and even the carcass is looking quite splotchy. But that's all going to change is when we go through the next the next stage, when we start adding some washes to help unify the colors, and then you'll start to see more of the definition of the model come back. All right, time to make our contrast mix. So this is the contrast medium from Games Workshop. All I'm going to do is I just take a pipette and just fill a metal dish, just in preparation for our own mixture. And the mixture, we're going to be using a couple of inks from Scale75 Inktensity line. So first off is Inktensity green. I'm going to add several drops to this, 3 out of that series. I don't know the exact ratio. And then this is Scale Intensity olive. So the Scale green from Inktensity is a little more of a green blue, almost like a Boreal green from their Scale line. And then the olive kind of gives it a lot more green yellow, which has this really nice color to it. That mixed with the contrast medium it's like my fake way of making Games Workshop's contrast paint. The nice thing about like, you know, like the contrast medium, I think it flows really well, has like, it just has a nice property of spreading the pigment out really well, and I think like pretty evenly. And you pair this with inks, and especially with inks have a lot of strong, they're very high concentrated of pigment, which actually, you know, kind of makes a pseudo contrast paint that comes from GW's pot anyway. So there's nothing wrong, of course. You can just use Games Workshop contrast paint. I'm not sure which exact color this would fall towards. Some sort of orc color, some sort of orc green. I only have the Dark Angels green in my collection, but yeah, I think it's quite fun just to mix your own paints and see what you can kind of come up with. Also, you know, when you do it yourself, you know, it's kind of like your own custom color. You know, not one anyone can just buy off the shelf. And but here I can, this is how you make it. Mix those two inks together. So after you cover the entire, slap it on the entire base, I'm going to use contrast medium again, and just straight contrast medium from on your brush, and I'm only applying it on the places that I want less of this contrast, less of this green to show up. So the main part is I'm going to be placing it on the head of the Tyranid carcass, and what this will do is just thin out that area, as well as I'm just applying it just at the very top of the plateau of those rocks. So there's going to be just a little less, like less saturation on the plateau and less saturation on the face. So it's going to show more of our, you know, our other previous purple layers onto there. It doesn't look like it right away, like it just looks like a big mess. And there's me actually, if you apply way too much of this contrast mix, you can always use a brush that you got and just like pull, like absorb some of the extra pooling and wipe it off on kitchen towel. So this is what the contrast paint or the contrast wash look like when it's almost dry. Honestly, I would actually wait for this to dry completely, but you know, I was under a deadline with Games Workshop because you know, sending me the Leviathan box and trying to get this model done for the our due date so we can you know, submit it in. But here I am again. I'm just going back again with Sunset Purple, and now I'm reapplying the highlights, working on here. You can work pretty rough, like this is not like a brand new brush or anything. This is just a size 2 from Artis Opus, and it's seen a little bit of wear already. It's got a pretty fine tip still, like it's nothing, like it's not completely flayed and trashed. But the main thing I want to notify here is that I'm just trying to keep my highlights pretty loose. The paint itself is I water it down approximately 50-50, so this is you know, half paint half water, just so, and then pair that up with a larger brush, and it leaves quite a softer mark when you apply these highlights. And I'm just trying to try to keep it pretty loose and fairly, you know, fairly sketchy. I'm not really looking for like opaque coverage, not looking for anything strong. And the nice thing is I'm always, again, I'm painting up towards the light, so where I wanted the primary parts of the highlights to focus on, so the front of the face. I'm just doing a little bit of these top kind of spikes into here. And you can see with like the paint dilution, the type of mark it's leaving. And any place that you want more, you know, where I want most of the light to gather, I'll do a couple of layers. I'll do a second layer just to punch out that that sunset purple a bit stronger, and coming out, the color is going to come out a little more saturated with a second or third layer that you're applying onto there. But the real trick is when you start applying this is just let the layer dry, you know, apply a few strokes, let it sit, let it dry, instead of you know, a common mistake is almost like over painting or over brushing an area when the paint is wet. It's like you're working it too much, and you might end up making even more of a mess. but keep loose and just enjoy it. You know, it's bases are always a little more. You can be a little bit more messy, paint a little more relaxed. As you can see, like as I move down this kind of like rib cage column in the spine, I think the highlights get smaller and smaller. So little dabs of highlights here, but as I move up towards the right side, see how the highlights are just getting bigger. And the sunset purple works pretty nice with the green. So like a little thing that's going on in the back of my mind about choosing these colors is the sunset purple leans more into the red. So it just helps contrast a little bit more with our with this with a lot of the green that's in this base. And again, you know, I'm doing a green base just to really help punch out the Terminator Captain from above. So it doesn't necessarily just have to be like, you know, it's not like it can represent moss if you really want to, but I think it's more of just giving an interesting atmosphere of making a deep green atmosphere that really contrasts with the Terminator Captain's armor. And I didn't want to make the Tyranid red because that would take attention away from the Terminator. So, you know, doing this this nice sunset purple, I thought was a nice choice that, you know, gives some contrast because you still want to kind of see this dead carcass, but you don't want it to steal any attention away from the Terminator that is standing on top of him in victory, or, you know, shouting for the next challenge. As you can see, I'm just making my way around again, you know, doing a second layer and just increasing the saturation in the highlight. I think I remember several times through this base, I I love just the paint and just, you know, just get your brush moving and painting these little details. And I remember going through the process several times. I had to tell myself, you know, not so much. You know, I don't want to do too much work in detail into the base. I don't want it to be a stronger like focal point to it, and of course a little bit of like time allocation as well. So it's almost like a little bit of a practice of restraint. It's like, okay, Brennan, don't paint this much, don't do this much detail. I'm like, oh, I kind of want to do like the whole face and, you know, get into it, but just trying to keep it loose, and, you know, get enough detail that you want, but, you know, not to get carried away. So this is me getting a little bit carried away, but it's kind of fun. It's some optional variations. So one thing like is interesting with ground and, you know, painting you know, more natural scenery is that you just hiding in variations of tones within the colors within the painting. So this is me I made a heavily glazed dilution wash of Sahara yellow. So this wash is like 70% water to 30% paint. And I'm just putting this this Sahara yellow wash, the Sahara yellows from Scale75, the scale color, as well as I also made a wash again with German grays from Vallejo Model Color, again like at least 70% 70% water, 30% paint. And I'm just applying these washes to just give myself a little more variation in the grain. Mainly through the just a little bit of like the Sahara yellow, you know, a little bit of a yellow ochre more at the top to give a little more of some warmer tones at the higher end, and then desaturating the colors, especially around the perimeter. Think of it as almost like a vignette, you know, around like that's an effect in photos where you see the perimeter, the outer perimeter of the frame gets a little bit of um, a little bit of a dark gradient, and just to lower the values of light around it, so it kind of like pulls you into the center frame of the photograph, you know, of the subject. So you can do kind of like the same thing with bases, so you can add like this perimeter of this, you know, a darker wash, or you know, a darker shade around the outside to kind of like pull you into the center of the frame. And again, I'm also applying the same, this German gray wash. And you saw me put it at the top of the plateau. The reason for that is that that's where he's going to be standing. So naturally, he'll cast a bit of you know, a shadow at it towards his feet, because his body is blocking majority of the light. So I'll apply a little bit of that wash up top there, just to you know, accentuate a little bit of that cast shadow. So up to this point, you know, adding all these extra washes, and I was like, ah, oh, I want more green. I want more saturation. I thought it was like a little bit too dull. You know, looking at it against the model, I'm like, I want a little more vibrancy. So I went back, and now I'm taking Boreal green from Scale75 Scalecolour, and I did the same thing. So I diluted the paint 50-50, so approximately 50% water, 50% paint, and got my Artis Opus dry brush, and again went back to town and started to bring up some highlights, and using the same stippling patterns as I did before. And this time, to increase the highlight, all I'm doing is adding a little bit of white into the paint, and just stippling on some more highlights. I just wanted to bring more saturation into it. And the base was looking a little too dark. And again, I've added more white into here. Honestly, this is the part where I might gone a little nuclear, because I added almost like a little bit too much white, and it got pretty bright. The stage coming up after that will correct that, and it's also will be used to also, you'll see in a moment how I start to tie the base into the character as well. So you could go this bright, knowing if you want to do the next stage, which I do with some unification, or if you don't want to run into this problem, don't mix so much white and maybe not be in as much of a rush. So here I'm going back with the airbrush. I'm filling it in with Tamiya's X20A thinner, and I'm making a glaze with my airbrush. So again, I'm taking more of that Boreal green, and this mixture here, this is approximately like 70% thinner to 30% paint. I'm running through the airbrush, and it's around about 16-18 psi. And what this is going to do here is I'm just going to use it as a glaze through the airbrush, and I'm pretty much applying it all on the lower areas, and trying not to hit the absolute highlights of the Tyranid, but this airbrush glaze goes over all of the green. As you can see, it starts to really it starts to knock down those really strong highlights that I originally created with the stippling brush, which was a little too nuclear. And also when it gets onto the purple of the Tyranid carcass, it further helps unify my highlights. But again, I'm not trying to like focus it, shoot it directly on the highlights. But I'm also going to take this and start applying it onto the lower parts of the captain. The nice thing is I like about here is how I'm using like the green more as an atmospheric effect, is at the lower ends of the model, how, you know, our light pattern with the Terminator is, you know, to help show, you know, a more height, and how more highlight is at the top is I'm adding this green at the bottom end to help tie him and the shadows into the lower ends of the base, so it doesn't, you know, when the character goes on top of the base, it looks like he's part of the same scene and a part of the same atmosphere, kind of giving them a little bit of a link in between. And of course, you should do this only pretty much when the Terminator is done. You know, don't just like finish part of it and not even paint, you know, the other details that he has on the figure without doing this. And now, like, you could pretty much be done, but again, you know, my nitpicky parts will go back and I'll start painting out some smaller details. So this is here just me with a Dubai brown from Scalecolour, and I am just painting in a little of the roots, a couple of the bolter shells, the casings onto there. I just use Scalecolor's Field Gray, so that's like a nice green gray. That we can apply just onto the to the bullets, as well as bring back some definition of the plateaus of the base, so these rock plateaus. So what I'm taking here is I'm taking that original Black Forest green with a brush, and I'm painting it on the vertical side raised areas of each of the main rock features, just to give like some natural shadow, so we can see that there's a, you know, a change in angle and elevation, and it just further helps illustrate that, you know, the plateaus being risen. It kind of helps definitely to show off some more depth. And here's my bum going itching to do more highlights, so I'm just back with some Boreal green mixed with some whites, and I'm just scribbling on some highlights, again keeping your brush really loose. Paint dilution very similar, you know, almost 50-50, and just, you know, making some strokes both that are mainly highlighting the edges of the rocks that are facing outwards, as well as just putting some, you know, various brush strokes of a little bit more like almost like expressive strokes, just to have fun and be a little bit interesting. Like I said, sometimes I just can't help myself. There's different styles of this. You could do this, you could even do this with dry brushing. Like you could just dry brush the edges with you know, the dry brush motion that's cutting across the model, and just edge dry brush stuff just to punch it out. But I like this way more. I think I just have more fun with it. But as you can see, with especially when you're, you know, using this the paint with like this approximately 50-50 mix, you can definitely see with this Boreal green mixed with white that with the wet paint, it leaves a lot stronger mark when it's wet, but just give it till it dries and it actually dulls down quite a bit. So You know, it might look harsh at the beginning and you might think to yourself, oh no, I made a really terrible mistake. But actually when it, you know, when it dries, like wet paint always looks a lot brighter than it is once it dries. So if you're not exactly sure, just do one stroke highlight and see how it looks. Let it dry, and then, you then you know what kind of mark you're actually making. So when you go through the rest. And this is me doing the exact same, pretty much the exact same stage as I was doing with the Black Forest green on the, you know, the vertical flat plains to help show more of the plateau. But I've added some black into it just to bring more contrast. I just wanted to show it even more, give a little bit more, give a little more contrast and drama to the base, because I thought the Black Forest just wasn't enough of a contrast jump. And again, like, that's about me, like I said earlier, you know, playing along with the colors, playing with the base, and seeing what works. You know, a lot of it is just experimentation. So look, more highlights. You put that, and then, you know, a little bit of highlights with that that Dubai brown, and you just mix a little bit of white into there just to touch a little highlights on those roots. And all that is left to paint to the base of the trim and mount the Terminator Captain on the base with a couple of small dabs of super glue cure. I hope this tutorial and the other three in this is helpful in painting your own copy of the model. A guide to paint of other Blood Angel space, or in a combination of methods to your own chapter with substituting different colors. If you enjoyed this tutorials and would like to learn more approach to painting, consider becoming a patron, which you will immediately gain access to over 100 hours of tutorials, video showcase, in-depth guides, as well as on foundation techniques just rely on a painting recipe, rather to help you learn and gain confidence in making your own creative decisions. I release between 5 tutorials a month, and all patrons gain access to my private Discord, where you can join our community to share your progress, give feedback to one another, and where you can reach me further for questions and expand on the lessons learned in my videos. Thanks again for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial. Happy painting!